Hi everyone, it's Dr. Hinson here, one of the good doctors of Abbey Research. If this is your first Abbey Research HMT video, you should know that myself and my colleague Dr. Donnelly are both doctors in social science, and we use our academic expertise, mine in imprisonment, resistance, and identity, and Dr. Donnelly's in women, silencing, gender, and religion, to analyze all the goings-on in the crazy world of Gilead, created by Hulu's Emmy Award-winning TV show, The Handmaid's Tale. We record a video for each episode, complete with witty remarks and sharp insights, and I'll include the link to our playlist in the video notes. Spoilers ahead, this video will reference events up through Season 2, Episode 3, so you have been warned. For today's video, I'm doing something a little bit different. As Dr. Donnelly and I were talking through some of our big questions at the start of this second season, and as I record this, we're 4 episodes in, we decided we wanted to take some time to fall down a few rabbit holes and make supplemental videos aside from our recaps and analysis. So if you've watched our recap of Season 2, Episode 2, On Women, which was a lot to take in that episode, then you'll know that I confessed to becoming kind of strangely fascinated with the use of hanging and other forms of capital punishment in Gilead. And I promised to do what I do best, conduct some research, and bring you guys a video with what I found. So for today's video, I'll be unpacking what I learned after spending very much the better part of a morning finding out what I could about the history of hanging and firing squads, and what I think they mean in dear old Gilead. Just a note here, I will be talking solely about hanging as a method of capital punishment, not its connection, particularly in the American South, to lynchings. I do not have the requisite expertise at all to talk about the history of lynchings or possible correlations to what's happening in Gilead, but I've included a few resources in the video notes for those who might be interested. So as a historian, I'm a big believer in context. So I'm kind of going to set up the context of capital punishment before I get into a little bit about why I think it's being used or how it's being used in Gilead. Capital punishment is defined as the legally authorized killing as a punishment for a crime. Seems pretty simple, right? So in Gilead, we see this take place in 3 forms of execution, both public and private: hanging, stoning, and firing squads, or execution by gun. Though all the guardians carry what look to be AR-15s or some form of assault rifle, we rarely, if ever, see them in use. We learn in episode 2 of season 2 that the entire staff of the Boston Globe were either hung or shot, promoting this rabbit hole. At the end of episode 3, we actually see the Guardians use the AR-15s. They fire on the plane as it's trying to take off, and then they execute the pilot with a handgun. But without question, hanging is the predominant method, shown early to us in episode 1 of the first season, again in episode 1 of the second season. So they like to hang people in Gilead. So I wanted to find out why. During my PhD research, I tangentially had to study the development of prison systems, so I was familiar with periods of reform and change and was not surprised to see these reflected in the types of capital punishment. Experts in capital punishment claim that it has been used throughout history as a means of crime control and social control, which really makes sense when we think about it in the Gileadian context, and I'm making that a verb, by the way. Though hanging dates back as far as Roman law, and it was common in the European legal tradition because honestly it was quick and certain and cheap, it went through several phases in America. In Stuart Banner's book, Death Penalty and American History, which, fascinating read, he outlines 3 phases: the founding period from the 17th to the 19th century, the penological period, which means related to the prisons, from the 19th to the mid-20th century, and then the politicization of the death penalty, which he tracks alongside the politicization of crime, which we start to see in the 1970s and 80s, and the war on crime and kind of the rhetoric and discourse developed around that. So for my purposes, I'm focusing on the founding period from the 17th to the 19th century. During this period, particularly in the early laws in the American colonies, there was a direct connection between the death penalty for a myriad of crimes and Old Testament scripture. And it was certainly seen as a mechanism for social and criminal control. We start to see reforms begin in America by the 1930s. Eventually, only people of murder, people convicted of murder are hanged in most states. Hanging remains the primary method of capital punishment until the advent of electricity. And electrocution as a means of capital punishment emerged horrifically during the competition between Edison and Westinghouse for primacy in the market. I wish I was kidding about this. I'm not. I looked it up. Edison decided to show the superiority of his current by publicly electrocuting animals. And some smart chap said, hey, I bet we can kill people doing that. So that's where we see electrocution come onto the scene as a means of capital punishment. Dark times. But this brings me to my biggest argument about why Gilead uses hanging primarily. In watching the show, we know that Gilead is anti-industrialist, right? We learned from the flashbacks to the Rachel and Leah centers that the leaders believed that mass industrialization, pollution, and chemically altered food are to blame for the low infertility rates, among many other sins. They tie environmentalism to the theocratic ideology of the state, and we get to see how, aside from cars, some guns only in the hands of guardians, medical treatment, electricity, and running water, Gilead has attempted to return to the heart of pre-industrialist agricultural society. The dress is conservative and harkens back to the socially and religiously conservative early days of America. And what I learned while researching hanging is that Gilead is not only anti-industrialist, it's anti-Enlightenment. So for those of us that don't remember our 7th grade history lessons on the Enlightenment, little refresher. The Enlightenment is the period where we begin to see global ideas of society and progress shift towards a more scientific and rational perspective. It's generally given the bounds of 1685 to 1815, which fits into this founding period of capital punishment, and brought with it a focus on science and reason over the use of political and religious dogma. It began a period of questioning the traditional authority, which we don't do in Gilead, and moving away from the agrarian, and what was often seen as violent past. So during this Enlightenment period, we also see the evolution of ideas relating to incarceration and capital punishment. By the end of the 18th century, we start to see the recognition that even the condemned persons have a level of humanity. And into the 19th century, we begin to see the lessening of capital punishment, particularly for lower crimes like adultery and stealing. And we also see the emergence in the belief that prisoners can be rehabilitated. So what does this all mean for our dear friends in Gilead? Well, Gilead has all the markings of a pre-modern Christian, pre-Enlightenment theocratic state. It has rejected reason and science in favor of politicized religious dogma, albeit bastardized, according to Dr. Donnelly, with a focus on moral utilitarianism. They only believe in the power of reform when related to handmaids because those ladies have viable wombs. Everyone else who breaks the laws are quickly judged and sentenced. Torture and manipulation are saved for the handmaids. Every other person who does not serve a purpose or conform is either killed or sent to the colonies. Within this context, hanging, particularly public hanging, serves a dual function by limiting the use of technology while also remaining a threat for the rest of society to stay in line. Remember, criminal and social control, which is like the heart of the Gileadian state. But you might be thinking and asking, where do firing squads fit into this Gileadian ideology? I have your answer. Firing squads are traditionally a military punishment. They're even quicker and cheaper than hanging, but the broader public perception is that it is an act of state violence that is associated, like in our larger national psyche, with the anarchy and unrest of the American West. So many people are actually, as I found out, starting to advocate for the use of firing squads as a method of capital punishment, particularly as we see more and more botched instances of lethal injection, where people really seem to be suffering and being tortured because of the lethal injection. As recently as last year, a man was executed via firing squad in Utah after his petition on the basis that firing squads were more humane than lethal injection, reached the Supreme Court, and they decided in his favor. So he was executed by firing squad. Symbolically within the military, firing squads represented the community over the individual. Collective punishment delivered by your peers. We see this also with stoning as a capital punishment used by the handmaids, where the idea that the handmaids are collectively judging those that have violated them or their rules. So the two times we see that in season 1, in the first episode in season 1, the handmaids stone a man to death who had raped a pregnant handmaid. So he's broken the laws, he gets collectively punished. And then we see it in the end of the episode when they're told that they have to stone Janine, who has also broken the laws of the handmaids, the moral code, and they refuse to do so. So in this sense, firing squads and stonings lend communal authority to the outcome. Order wins out by killing over disorder and disobedience. And within a military context, firing squads were used to punish treason or mutiny, which were crimes against the state, which can also be seen as resistance against or rejection of the state. So this fits perfectly into why it's used at the purging of the Boston Globe offices. Collective shooting symbolizes solidarity, unity, and conformity, which are all integral parts of Gilead's ideological control. There's also a religious symbolism to spilling blood through firing squads or other forms of killing. So a stick tap to my partner in crime, Dr. Donnelly, for this, who is the religious expert, for giving me this explanation. There is a biblical principle called blood atonement, where all humans are viewed as sinners, and the sacrifice of blood makes a person clean again or cleansed of their sin. So if we apply this to Gilead or firing squads, spilling traitors' blood serves to cleanse the nation of sin. And in Gilead, traitors without viable wounds are beyond redemption. Through this, we see the press, the Boston Globe, viewed as traitors for, as we know, attempting to document and report the coup and the kind of the takeover of the sons of Jacob. As we learn more about Gilead through flashbacks, we learn that they have purged or cleansed large groups of people who threaten the ideological landscape as they are reconstructing it. So it's morally and theologically justified, possibly through this principle of blood atonement. We don't know. They haven't told us. We're just guessing. It's possible that they don't need firing squads anymore, per se, since the state now has control, but we still see hanging used as a continuous threat and method of punishment. So that's all I have for you guys. I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into methods of capital punishment. Dr. Donnelly is going to be coming at you soon with an explanation of why the Marthas are called Marthas, which I know will be fascinating. So please comment below with any thoughts or suggestions or questions, observations. If you have something you would love us to take a deep dive into, make a suggestion. Who knows? Maybe we will. We love to hear from you guys and to have you engaged in our conversation about this as well. But that is everything I have. So I am Dr. Hinson of the Good Doctors of Abbey Research, and I will see you all later this week for episode 4.